Okay, great. Here we are again for another session of High Pitch Conversations in a New Key. Today we are going to talk about change. And coming into this session, this conversation, I was thinking to myself that there's really two different ways we can think about change. And one is, and maybe we can make sure we address which one we're talking about. And one is like the change that happens that we kind of find ourselves, in. Um, but I also wanted to touch base on the change we want to see, and maybe the change we are working on, and talk about our different relationships to those two types of change. So just being aware that there's in my way of looking at it anyways, that this discussion made this distinction, and I noticed how my relationship to those two notions of change is really different, right? So yeah, so we can start anywhere, and we don't have to talk about each one of those, but I would like to certainly weave both of them in this conversation.
So one was change as change just is, and one is change you want to make.
Exactly.
Okay.
Because one of the things that I got hooked in I don't want to just spill all my beans, I didn't really think about it that much, is that I noticed that my relationship to those two are different. Like I noticed that I have this one whole narrative around the change that just happens. And um, and then when I take a different perspective, I'm like, this is what I want to change, and this is how I'm doing it. It doesn't seem to be a subset of that change that happens. It seems to be like, oh, this is all good, and this is all like in the right direction. And yet, I think that, yeah, I try to loosen those boundaries. Is what I want to change, what's its relationship to the change that's happening that I feel is beyond my control or has a momentum of its own, or or any kind of change, changes in our bodies, changes in our lives. But yeah, I would just like to know, also within the background of how we respond to change, um, when do we take ownership of our part in making change happen, and yeah, what do we want to change? What do we want? Yeah, how do we want to participate in that? Or can we? I mean, sometimes I ask myself that question, right? Can I actually participate in the larger rhythms of change that seem to be not about me?
Mm-hmm.
I'm noticing as you talk about how the two feel different, that there's one place where they might meet, at least for me in my body as I'm contemplating this. And when you talk about change just happening, I'm one of those people who resisted change a lot as a kid growing up. I didn't like it. I loved my life as it was. I didn't really like things changing. I lamented when they would change. And so a big part of my growing up has been actually to figure out how to relate to change in a better way and to actually start leaning into it more. So I find that as my relationship to change as it happens to me has changed, it's getting closer to that feeling of actually wanting to activate change. So there's something about when I'm in reaction or in response to something happening, or when I'm actually active and making something happen. And I feel like there's a place that they could at least touch closer to each other as I change my relationship to change and just go, it's a given, it's part of life, it's probably one of the constants we can actually count on. So then how am I going to work with it? And that there, I feel like there's something that gets closer. I don't know how that is for you all.
Well, I want to bring in what's happening quite early into this conversation because I think it's very relevant and why we're maybe bringing up this topic of change. Like COVID happened to us, right? and people who are in a better relationship with change and who are practiced in the practice of change are probably doing better during this last year than people who do not have a relationship with change. But that's very much how I can't seem to entangle, at least for me, the change that is inevitably here and the change that I am consciously seeking in myself, in my family, as to how we're supposed to live now with what we know now of what's happening in the world, what can happen in the world.
I mean, I think when it comes to thinking about the relationship between those two things, that there's a paradox there. And it's a paradox that is so easily overlooked in the interest of achieving some kind of notion of agency. And the paradox is that, of course, I am an individual. You are all individuals, and you are unique in your individuality and your experience and the way you use words and the way you taste rice and the way you walk and the way you go through a forest and the way, Bonita knows how to be with a horse, or the way Eche knows how to be in a hot climate, or the way, we all know different things in different ways. And in that sense, there is a real uniqueness. But at the same time, it's impossible to point to that place in ourselves that is actually ours, right? So it's everything that I know or that I am has become through being in the contexts of my life. And for some reason, that's really easy to forget. So it makes it so that if I look out at the world, I have a way of sensing into it that it has been developing, growing. It's been shaped and formed over my life. So the thing is this, is that I am me, but I am not me. I am my contexts, my DNA, my language, my education, all that stuff, culture, the various experiences of my life, my broken bones, my broken heart moments, my exaltations, my inspirations, right? And what's very difficult to know is whether you are or I am enacting upon the world or enacting upon my perception of the world. And that perception is not just about what you see, it's in your body. So I find this question to be really tricky. And I have to admit that I get a little bit nervous around the questions of what change do you want to make? Because it seems like you could ask that question far too easily without paying attention to the fact that most of the inclinations that I would have would be informed by my existing contexts. So they want to actually produce a continuation, a perpetuation. Beep. End of time. Okay.
It's interesting because I'm getting a much more clearer understanding of my opening statement by reflecting the contrast here, and so I mean, one of the things when Eche, you said COVID, you know, our response to COVID was really do not react, oh, you know, do the most minimal reaction as possible. Like we didn't wear masks here, and the UPS guy comes and it's like a pleasure for him to wear, to have like we did as little change as possible because we're very sensitive to like these, what's like these hysteresis that come through, you know, like we're maybe because we've seen a lot of them. And so there's like this sense in which when we first bought the farm and we both were contractors and making decent money, and then the recession hit and it eliminated our jobs. We're like, it's not going to change our vision for the farm. Like there's like, it's not that we're resistant to change. We're extremely porous. I feel that I'm extremely porous. Like if this happens, well, then that happened. Let's get on with it. Like if this happens, then that happens. And I don't really feel too much push and pull. You know, I don't feel stubborn because obviously I have to adapt. That it does make a difference. It's like, oh, well, it's yet another thing. I've been like this in business for a long time. Like there's always movement. There's always space to move. There's always something smart that you can, a move you can make that releases complexity and gets you from here to there faster. We lost Miriam. And so that's like, I mean, I just want that reflected back because I feel that I've been that's a real signature of yeah, like my students a couple of years, like Trump happened and my students were all going crazy around Trump, and then Kavanaugh happened and they're all going crazy around Kavanaugh, and then COVID happened and there's all these conspiracy theories and they're like, you know, the world has gone mad. And I'm like, yeah, so we've been mad before, like going mad, being hysterical, having psychotic kind of societies is part of our history. And so for me, I have this kind of relationship to change where like I'm highly not reactive. Like things come and go and they take their time it takes. Like this person hates me now. I'm like, okay, well, he hates me now or whatever. And I have this feel, that's how I relate to this. It's probably decontextual. I feel more that it's not like I don't know what's happening, but yeah, I feel that I'm very porous to it. Hey, Sky, we just got started.
Welcome. We're just getting started. You know, the questions, the topic on the change. And Nora highlighted how we're not, like who is doing the change, basically. We're not just ourselves, we're our context. And what you are highlighting with your personal example, Bonnie, is such, for me, of a right context. Like you can afford not to make major moves that much because you were already in your farm. You know, if you were somewhere else, maybe you would have a need. Or rather, I'll just speak personally, me being in Portland, I'm feeling like, oh my God, my child is going to be stuck in four walls for the, you know, undetermined amount of time, immediate future. It became a very clear thing to me that we need to make a move and shift our context to one that can allow for minimum movement once we get there. You know what I mean?
Right, but if you maybe you still experienced it as we're okay, now there's COVID. We haven't changed anything because we're still focusing on our family. We're still focusing, it's still in the direction of something. So that's what I'm saying in that sense. Like in that sense is that, yeah, something, I don't know. um, I guess it doesn't mean whether you moved or not, whether that means it's different. It's whether, yeah, it's just other thing. I don't know.
It's so interesting because I guess if there's anything that I sort of feel in my belly that the world is facing in the coming decades, it's massive whiplash of culture change, economic change, ecological change, um, all kinds of change from culture to, you're right. So, I mean, everything from the notion of family to gender to um, jobs and employment to identity and racism and exclusion and what is an education, and there's a lot of confusing change rapidly taking place, I think. And when I think about how to prepare for that change, it's not really about how I want to direct it, but to your point, Bonita, it's really about how to be in it. And it's some kind of way of being able to keep attentive to the emergence and the submergence and the complexity and the processes that are happening. And in order to keep that attention, the adrenaline spike of the, drama just really doesn't help. And so there is a kind of learning to stay in the larger calm, like life just changes. These things just happen. I know when I started going into menopause, there were all these people who were like, yeah, take this, take that, and it'll make it, stop it. And I was thinking, well, I've had kids. I kind of, I welcome getting to the other side of this, actually. I'm not in a rush to stop it. And other people need to stop it because they haven't had kids yet, or they want to do that, or they are in a different relationship with their body. But I really just felt like, okay, so there, there's being on this side and there's being on that side, and how can I kind of best move through this? Yeah.
I wonder if this connects with my experience. As I mentioned earlier, I didn't used to like change at all, and then got very curious of how I could change my relationship with change. And I love what you're saying, Nora, about how we in change, which I also heard as how we with change. And one thing that I have found helpful in that regard is to keep on the lookout for what actually stays constant in the middle of change, because that often offers me the doorway to the great calm, or the anchoring in the middle of whatever storms and big changes and little changes might be happening. So I love sitting with that, noticing of what all is changing and what's actually not changing. And when you brought up menopause, it really lit that up for me, because I remember, and I'm still in it, noticing how you can be in your body so intimately feeling change. I mean, literally, there is that wave of warmth that moves right through you, not through another person. It's through your body. You can feel it. And yet you can practice that witnessing or just watching or not doing anything, a bit like what Bonita was talking about. You can be so intimately in the middle of the wave and yet be watching the wave. And I find that a very interesting in a way paradox to hold right in your body, but also in relationship to all the change that's going on, is like, how can we keep the calm? Or that quote that I have on my fridge because I love it, how can you keep learning how to dance in the rain rather than waiting for the storm to pass? And if we get better at that, does that change how we are in change? In my experience, it really does. It's like I'm not resisting life itself, because life itself is change. So when I can learn to find that which is in a way like a bedrock, not as in solid and stable, but it's something that is anchored and that is same with being a parent and watching my daughter grow and delighting in every new exploration that happened, but also that bittersweetness of it's gone, she's not the little 2-year-old anymore. And then starting to look for, but what are the constants, and looking around me too. Like often when I'm walking through town, I'll see elderly people and I'll just do as a practice for myself, I'll keep imagining who were they when they were a little lad or a lass, skipping along the sidewalk, and just to get a feel of the essence that lies, that's unchanged, that lies underneath the very changed exterior. So yeah, I guess for me, the whole question of how to be within change is partly connected with and what is constant in the middle that can anchor us through, and that maybe also points to something that's very real, because it doesn't change.
Maybe this is this touches on what Nora was saying, and also Miriam, what you've just said. I've been noticing, and I'm sorry to miss the beginning. I somehow had the time wrong. So Bonnie, I suspect based on the end of what I heard you say, someone hating you for changing something. I resonated with that. But one of the things I'm noticing in myself as a microcosm of the macrocosm, because that's very often how I learn and relate to what's happening in the culture, is through what's going on in my body or in my psyche. I've been noticing the fragmentation in myself. And like, I've known about this concept of fragmentation for a long time. Like, I get it on the intellectual level. But because of all the change in my life right now, the fragments are freaking out. And one of them wants nothing, like just wants safety and security. And another one is wanting to push, even like she wants the changes to be big and lasting, and she wants to do something like AJ did and go to Costa Rica. Like, she's kind of wild. And before I was really conscious of this polarization almost in myself, and the fragments wanting very different things, I was experiencing a lot of confusion, like really feeling like very unsure about what to do and where to go and what the next step is. And now that I'm really holding them, and I'm sure there are more than two, but I got two. I'm really relating with each of them and trying to sort of pull them apart and let them individuate and tell me what they need and want and how they're doing with the change. And it just, for me, it's given me a lot of empathy towards, this country, for example, and like what it actually does in the system when the fragmented parts are at odds, like a little bit at war. I was surprised to find the confusion. Like, we see all the conflict, but there's actually a lot of really scary confusion where I felt I couldn't really trust myself. And so one of the things I've been doing is just trying to find the whole, or trying to find the part that can hold all of it, including the confusion. And And so, yeah, I'm curious. It's made me very curious about, because the media doesn't report much on confusion. It never acts confused. It never throws up its hands. It's like, we don't know. We just don't know. We don't know what we want. We don't know. So I'm really looking for like evidence or like little places where we can tend to the confusion versus continuing to persist in the paranoia and fragmentation.
So I'm hearing components of change as we're weaving things and teasing them apart. It feels like there's the what you referred to, Sky, as the whole, or what you referred to it as the unchangeable within Miriam. And then there's what you're talking about, Bonnie, with you know, not did you call it not changing? I think Nora talked about it as how to be in the change as part of it. And I'm also hearing the needs, you know, which is a very rare capacity, as simple as it might sound, this question of like, what do you need? You know, most of us have lost touch with what we need in the process of growing up. It's a very hard one to respond for most people. And it just makes me remember one of the sentences that you said to me, Bonnie, years ago. One of the ones that made me fall in love with you was, you're like, you still have to wake up in the morning and do something with your life. You know, there's that, like, I wake up irritated. I wake up something, you know, and I have to understand what's going on. Like, what am I going to do today with my life and with this energy, or what's this irritation about? So there's that inevitable aspect of change. Like, inevitably, as long as we wake up every day, we're going to do something that will have consequences, some kind of change. I don't know how to weave it all together, but I feel like we're all, you know, holding parts of the elephant and expressing these aspects, these qualities about change. I do want to highlight the needs part though. Like, it was for me, and I feel like the mamas around me after COVID, many of them are in this anxious, nervous state of being because something so radically changed around them. And it is creating this unease within. And they don't know, they're confused. They don't know how to relate with it most of the time. Yeah, I feel lucky to, again, it was another sentence by Bonnie that got me brave enough to do this, the kind of changes I've been doing since COVID. You said in a conversation about your article that we had, this is a time to follow your instincts more than any other time. I would love to tease that apart. I don't know if you remember saying this, and I would love to hear why you said that, because I think it's extremely accurate and helpful for people to hear.
Yeah, that makes me think of so COVID happens, and I think that you know, so there's a shift, And I think that the difference between your response and maybe what I was trying to suss out was, it seems to me that you took advantage of the shift energy to get closer to what you always wanted to do, not retreat from what you always wanted to do. Okay, so that is the difference. Like, shift energy happens, and many people say, oh, now's not the time to move toward what I always wanted to do. Now is the time to hunker down and whatever, to contract, and you know what I'm saying? That's now clarified. So give it, yeah, that's interesting. And I assume that I mean, it's not, you don't have to be in Costa Rica forever, but I think it's closer to what your long-term kind of instinct was. It's a move, it's a shift in that direction. And so many people shifted in away from the direction they had been hoping for before these things happen.
Isn't it interesting when we say COVID happened? Because as soon as I hear that, I'm like, COVID happened. And what, I mean, we all have probably slightly different understandings of what that exactly means, but what it played out to be was a huge part of COVID happened. And then we reacted to it happening. And that's that whole package together is COVID happened. And I sometimes sit back and I go, we could have responded in so many different ways.
Yeah.
And I think some of our discomfort with not knowing, with confusion, with change actually played into how COVID happened. There was such a deep need for safety, security, for knowing, for figuring it out, for having decisions, for looking decisive, that all played into, or is still playing into, how COVID is happening.
Hmm.
So I'm back to what Nora said at the very start of, in a way, there's this dance, like we're always in context, and how change unfolds has a lot to do with what is happening to us, and then how we are happening to the change ends up being sort of this emergent resultant thing that I guess is life. That would then be individual and collective. But I do find that there's something about what your question right at the start, Benita, of like, okay, and then we can also make change happen. So that's very interesting, is there's that thing going on, you know, life's happening, we're in response to it, it unfolds. But then the insertion of will, or of choice, or of directionality is also in there. I mean, I'm literally thinking back to, we had a conversation months ago about will and how it develops in a young child. And I don't know if I shared that, but I've always found it so fascinating when you watch a 1-year-old just dropping a spoon, and then it falls to the ground. And then usually the adult pick it up, give it back. And they actually don't want to keep holding on to the spoon. They just drop it again. And if you look carefully, I mean, you could get into a story of like, come on, she's doing this to annoy me, just hold on to the spoon. But really, if you look carefully, there's this discovery of, I'm making something happen. I'm actually a cause to an effect. I let go, the thing falls down, there's a clatter on the ground, and then it gets picked up. And the fascination and the delight of actually being an instigator of change in that moment, I think is completely miraculous and thrilling when we think of what it is to be human. So in that dance, there is, I think, also this, I don't know, if maybe like an invitation of life, that we can insert will, we can insert choice, not completely, because we're always going to be in that dance that we've been talking about, but we can shift the wind a little bit. We can hold the sail a certain way so that the boat goes slightly that way instead of that way. So I just wanted to bring that in too. I don't think it's just what's happening is what's happening. The future is not yet written, and I think it's so important to keep that in mind, and for me to get personally good at bearing the discomfort of not knowing, so that I don't jump to a conclusion too quickly about what my next future moment should be. to actually allow it to unfold and be more discerning in how I will insert my will and choice making in that dance that is never mine to control completely.
I think it's just so fascinating because there is that will. My son used to have this little steering wheel that snapped onto his car seat, and sometimes he would turn it in the same way that the car turned. And then he had this fantastic experience of having turned the car. And I guess that, that kind of says something about how much of these things that we think we're changing, we're just changing anyway. And is that something to be paying attention to in the nuanced relationing that's going on in the context of what are the changes that are in the sort of somatics of the contexts of our environments that are already in shifting motion, and what can you bring to that motion that allows it to, or that keeps it filled with vitality? That's my big question, I think. Because I guess the thing that I think is so prevalent culturally in from Western education systems and economies and so on and so forth is that there is this, the separations and the mechanizations and how deep those things are, that they keep producing these, kind of anxiety moves that shoot for first order change. We have to fix the child that is, misbehaving. We have to fix the whatever instead of create the conditions in which the child can change. And they're not the same thing, because one of them is dealing with change that is not in the first order. So I think so often the thing that will piece gets to is some kind of first order bit. And for me, that the deeper change has to do with the tonality. It has to do, when I think about those people or situations where there has been real change, the depth of it followed a tone. It followed some kind of a flavor or a melody or a tone that was happening in the communication, more than any agenda that anyone said or any of their visions or any of anything else, which is actually why I am I guess I'm a little bit sort of disturbed with when I hear people talking about change and it's really superficial change, and that we have to have hope for this really superficial change seems to me to be both controlling the tone and controlling the direction of this idea of change, and it spooks me, because I guess I long for there to be depth and rigor, and with that depth and rigor comes a totally different tone, where it's not a frivolous hope at all that one is kind of producing. It's more like, I don't know, that word gumption or wherewithal or morale, or it's some kind of warmth in the fiber of being that comes into relationships that change other relationships, if that makes sense. But I guess I get really spooked when I see these kind of efforts to project Let's imagine the future we want to have, and then let's create the steps to get there. Like that doesn't seem like a good idea at all to me, to do that. Because it doesn't have all the juicy details and the weirdnesses that actually produce life in every moment. And those things are all coming out of some kind of tonality. Yeah, I don't know. Something like that.
I think one of the different contexts is, and check me if there's, you want to detail this out a little better, Nora, but one of the contexts is a lot of people are operating on, they're trying to operate on this other background change. You know, let's figure out the future we want to have, which means they want all that background change to be in the direction that they want, to be more like me. And that's different than who do I want to become as a person? And can I take ownership of that? And despite all the evidence to the contrary and all these changes, can I continually commit to that? This is who I want to become as a person. And so that may, in my mind, you know, I might get very excited that this may change more other people and make them happy and create community. But if it doesn't, that's not why I'm doing it. You know, so I think today, one of the, and I know you know this, one of the, I use the distinction between holistic being and systems thinking. And this, and it's, people get confused because they think if they're good enough systems thinker, they can map out the synergistic structures of all these relationships and then create codes for that, and then that'll happen. Versus what Sky was talking about, if I continue to move toward more wholeness, then I am becoming more holistically engaged. I mean, and so, but I think you can have will over the question of who do you want to become as a person. And I don't mean the exterior. I mean, and that changes, right? You have like a beat on it, but as you get older, it reveals more of itself to you.
I mean, I have to throw in there, you know, it's like, I think you can't underestimate how significant the resistance is and the trauma in the system, personally and collectively. Like, I've been studying my own family's history of being, the women being fixers. You know, we're fixers. And so, Nora, when you were speaking, I was relating to the annoyance, I mean, I'll call it annoyance, that I have when people are trying to fix things on a superficial level, because I got fixed a lot when I was a kid because my mother couldn't handle my pain and my discomfort because hers wasn't handled, and because the, you know, it's like on back through the line. And the way it's come through, like I finally put my finger on it recently when I was trying to fix my daughter's pain. And it was so familiar, like somatically familiar to me, this movement towards just making it better and taking on too much responsibility. I mean, it reminds me of activism in a way. You know, again, with the microcosm to the macrocosm, it's like I was making her pain, all of it, my responsibility, and I was going to fix it. And in that moment that I became aware of how it felt in my body, I felt my mother. And then I just kept feeling backwards. And it was, you know, it arose at a time when things were really, really hard for my family. And for my family, it had to do with poverty. And for other families, it has to do with other things. But, you know, I don't see this happening in this conversation, but in a lot of the conversations I'm a part of, like, for example, around climate change, there's this way we talk about, like, let's not do that thing where we fix. And we're all like, yeah, let's not do that thing. You know, like, we're in agreement on the intellectual level that we don't want to do that thing. But wow, I mean, I consider myself a pretty conscious person with regards to my behaviors. Like, at least I'm looking at it all the time. And it took me this long. Like, it wasn't clear to me. It wasn't known to me until just recently that I'm a fixer. And that affects every relationship I have. And now I'm trying to really connect with that tendency, and probably for the benefit of my own family and the healing of my lineage, but also so that I can understand what is the process for becoming addicted. It's a little bit of an addiction in a way to the fixing. And I somehow sense that women have it more than men. I don't know why. But anyway, it runs so deep, you know, it's like in the bones, in the DNA in some way.
And in some way, I think that change is always about learning and mutual learning, right? You didn't just learn that by yourself. You learned that in relationship. And so the ability to be able to perceive that in yourself and in your relationships becomes the change. So it's not, you don't, once you've perceived it, you kind of don't need to enact will. You don't need to pull the will button, you know, because it's already happened. And you've felt it. And I think that's a very interesting kind of piece of, certainly of where I am with my work right now, is just looking at how so much of the trouble is how we are each learning to be in relationship with each other. And sometimes I feel like that trouble's in me, or it's in you, or it's in them, or it's in, but then I start to realize it isn't there, it's in the relationship. And so the act of will on myself, or the act, like, I don't really know where to put it, because it isn't there to be, you can't grab it. But that learning that comes out of it seems like it just kind of makes things shift.
So I'm hearing some guideposts already, and I know so many of us in this group are allergic to my guideposts, but here we go. This movement towards being more whole, and being guided by a desire for vitality, or making choices towards a more vital self, a more vital life. Can we, for the sake of practicality, for the mamas who are anxious, who are watching, like, you know, the question that arises for me so strongly right after COVID, exactly like you said, Bonnie, was about me realizing, oh, all these desires for a more pro-life way of living in me are not just romantic ideas, they're actually necessary. So COVID gave me the courage to finally get myself out of a context I was taught to live in, towards one that I actually really felt like I should be living in. It was a pro-life movement, and it came from within. And but before I could get courageous enough to act on that, I was like seeking like grabbing you a little, like, how are we supposed to make our decisions about change? Now, how am I supposed to confirm that what's coming to, my mind, my heart are actually legitimate enough to act on? And then I had this dream. I had a dream of my family and some other family in a glass minibus, and a whole traffic jam is, we're on the front line of a like 7-lane traffic jam. The front is open, the road was open, but we couldn't go. Like, we were in a traffic jam, and it was sunny, but all the cars were under shadow. And we have this glass container of a minibus, and Neil, he was his little self, his real self. He's like, "Mommy, I want sun. I want sun." I'm like, "Yeah, honey, I see the sun. We're gonna get there very soon." And we just can't. And I finally think to look back, and I see these huge dinosaurs behind us, covering us wherever we go, all the cars. And then Neil is like, "Mommy, just turn left. Look, that's a sunny road." So we turned left, we listened to him. We turned left, and we were in the sun, and the traffic jam and the dinosaurs passed us. And I woke up so happy that morning, feeling like I got a very clear message about, here is the desire and need of new life, who's my son. If I can attune to that and design a life around that's pro-life, that will allow his life to flourish. I could take that as a guidepost, because guideposts really help me. I love orienting towards an understanding, like, oh yeah, vitality is what you want to look for. Holism within is what you want to look for, versus contraction you want to stay aware of and not move in the direction when you can help. Yeah, so I would love to hear from each of you if any more practical guideposts like jams can come out for people to hear from us.
I don't know if this is going to count as one, but it did come up, and it came up listening to Nora and then you, Eche, and well, all of you actually, Sky too. Is like part of that wanting to fix it. I feel like it's wanting to have security, wanting to have stability, and when I think about change and even inserting, maybe it's not so much will, but inserting our creativity, like just inserting ourselves in the stream. The stream's happening and we get to insert ourselves, and it actually changes the stream a little or a lot. Again, I don't know if this is a guidepost, but to me, it's like the relationship to change, the relationship to the unfolding now, the relationship to a possible future is ongoing. Like, we're never done. I sometimes find in myself, it's like, I wish I could just get in shape once and then I'm done for life. Or I wish I could just brush my teeth once and then I'm just done with that. Or cook a meal once and then all the meals are done. Like, how come I have to do this every single day over and over? Like, what's up with that? But I think it's kind of pointing to that guidepost is like, we're never done. Like, I'm so glad you had that dream, and it's so powerful and beautiful. And almost like that dream needs to keep being dreamt, and it will show up in different ways. Like that time Neo pointed left, but who knows, next time he might point up or down or right. Or so it's kind of like the shapes and forms are changing all the time. There are constants, as in like the guidepost in a way is you listening to that new life or that youth. But there could be a time where it's actually better to listen to a wise elderly person and not Neo, right? And if you get fixated on we listen to the children, I think as a general, it's a great practice, but we could be missing the mark of what's needed in that very moment. So I guess my guidepost is, can we be, as a tonality, can we be in such a place of listening and almost like humility and creativity, so that we're never done. It's never completely fixed. We've never figured it out. We've never solved it. We're more, the constant is that we're in the mode of, we're like on our toes. We're willing to bear discomfort and to receive ease as they come. We're willing to keep listening and co-creating, something like that. So like I said, I don't know if it counts as a guidepost, but it's what I got right now.
It's like the guidepost of no guidepost. The guidepost says, pay attention to the present complexity of the moment.
Yeah, that is a clear guidepost. You know, it truly is what you just said, Nora.
Yeah, but it is. I mean, you know, it is. And somehow I guess it's also, I think for me, the big one right now is also just remember that whatever it is you think you're seeing, it's not the whole picture. And that's that kind of in contrast, and in the dance with Skylar, what you're saying of this, you know, this sort of quest, orient toward wholeness, but recognize that your wholeness is going to also be limited by, I mean, you know, I just imagine if I was put in charge of Bonita's horses for the day. I don't know them. I don't have the nuance to know how they're doing and what they need and where they are and how they are with you, Bonita, right? It's like but knowing that I'm not perceiving those nuances means that I'm going to move much more carefully and pay attention, which I think is something we're seeing in the very painful reveal of the limitations of the mindset of, you know, Western history that we learned in school, and, you know, just the tumbling down of the scaffolding of the epistemology that was fed. Yeah, the learning continues.
Yeah, I know you have to go soon, Nora, but I think this thing you said, Miriam, this "it's never done" is really a key insight, because like my mom years ago, you know, she was raised us, she and my father raised us, but then my sister was a single mom, and then they had to help raise her children. And one day she said to me, I can't wait till it's just done. And I'm like, Ma, it's like never done, because then the kids are going to have kids. I mean, it's like, it's never done. And I think one of the things, like as a Taoist, there's a lot of ways in which you interpret things differently than other spiritualities. And one of the things about Taoism is that the law of impermanence gives you great confidence, because you can count on it, that things take, you know, the things come and go, and they take the time it takes. And so you get a lot of confidence, because when the situation's bad, you don't have to do anything. It's not sustainable. Or if, you know, and you don't have to add energy into that. And when the situation's good, then it's very sweet, because it's going to take, you know, come and go, and that coming and going is never over. And maybe that's what you meant, Nora. I mean, that gives a flavor to when you said, let's just design civilization. And maybe that's a cool thing to be a part of, in terms of like this constant learning. But if you have this thing like, and then it'll be done, right? That's the sour taste. It's like, if we do it right, it'll be done. And I think you can I think there's a way to get delight, like I heard it in your tone of your voice, in that it's never done. But to me, that turns around to the question then, why is it that we've forgotten that we are learning, as Nora said, we are learning creatures. And we have this sense that we don't know how to learn, we don't, that we have this sense that we have to know it and have the blueprint and the blueprint plan before we enter the situation, because we don't see ourselves as learning beings. And most of the things we have to learn, we don't, like when you watch your kid learn, they don't know how to speak. They don't learn how to speak before they speak. They're speaking learning. And most of the things that are important in life, we don't know how to do it. We don't know how we did it afterwards, but we can learn to do it. And maybe, and so some of all these ideas that we've all been talking about really kind of integrate that way. Bye, Nora.
Bye bye. Talk to you soon. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think that's like where the will comes in, because you kind of will, it's like an acceptance, but it's more, it's got more agency in it, that it's never done, and I'm going to be part of that. And I'm, so,
in a way, it's being willing to live with that paradox of you get to participate and contribute, but not control. And you get to be part of this ever unfolding thing, life, existence, project, whatever it might be. And in a way, like I actually think, I don't know if I've told you this story, but I remember I've been taking singing lessons for my whole adult life. And I remember my teacher once looking at me and saying, and I had this idea, I think I did maybe mention, we were talking about spirituality once. I had this idea that I needed to be this empty vessel that would just kind of like let God's music move through me. And then she looked at me and she said, you've got to own this, girl. Like, you put your fingerprint on your sound. You are a mother. You have birthed a child. You have worked. You've done this and that. And she kind of named my list. And it was such an allowance to, I actually get to participate. I get to co-create. Like, the idea is not just to let life move through me as this empty sphere that it just kind of goes through. It's like, no, I get to co-create. And it was such a kind of an obvious aha thing of like, oh, wow. Because I knew that in the rest of my life, but somehow I had not figured that out when I was singing. And it felt more right or angelic or whatever you name it, to just let it pour through. And yeah, there's something so beautiful about getting our fingerprints on what we're participating in. So I think it's living with that paradox. In a way, it's surrender, it's humility, it's not knowing, it's listening, and then it's actually making choices, getting creative, deciding to go to Costa Rica, deciding to follow the voice of your son, listening to those two parts in you, Sky, and making space for both. I mean, you're active in that, right? You could choose not to. You could choose to ignore the sensing of those, or you can choose to. So I think it's much more like a dance, this whole thing around how do we live with change. It's not this or that. It's both together. And I remember having this conversation. I was 17 with my best friend at the time, and she's still, one of those just soul friends. And we had those, when you're a teenager and you have these conversations and they're so like intense, and and every time with her, we'd hit on something that felt like truth. It was always a seeming paradox, like every single time. And this one was, we were somehow contemplating Joseph, so the husband of Mary and the story of Jesus. And we were like, he's so not talked about, like, what's up with him? And we kind of went on this whole exploration of who's this guy. We ended up on this paradox of the human being in a way is both a grain of sand and is God. Like, can we actually live with that paradox of like, we're nothing. We're literally like, we're just getting washed by the ocean and the waves, and we're just one out of billions,
Yeah.
and we can step into we can actually be an artist. We can create this life. And can we hold those two? And that kind of felt like almost like hitting a bit on Joseph.
I think what you say is so important, Miriam, because I find that this is really common for whatever reason, where we are now in this massive transitional time, or at least, I don't know, some kind of a consciousness arising around the transitions and our will or the fingerprint we could put on them. I hear it all the time. There's a way, maybe it's even developmental, that people mistake wanting the desire to be that vessel for the thing to move through. I feel like I'm counseling that a lot, and because I had to learn it myself, I also wanted to write in that way. I just wanted to channel the divine. And it's very beautiful, that urge. There's something so sincere and pure in it's what you're saying about like being the grain of sand, like, oh, I'm totally insignificant in this process. But like, that it's like, but who are you? Where are you also omnipotent or omnicompetent in the process? Where is your artistry? Where's the artisan? Where's the storyteller? Where's the healer? Where's the shaman? Where's the business person, the merchant? Like, that fingerprint is such a great word, our unique fingerprint there. I just wanted to emphasize it because I feel like it's really happening a lot. There's a real porousness, like even sort of a boundarylessness sometimes in this green meme or whatever, like where the culture kind of is, and it really takes that as the highest example of creativity right now. I think it's like being completely absent from the process.
There's also the question of, if you're the vessel and you're the instrument that's being played, you can still work on the instrument, right? And so that's another reframe of that. Like,
Here she comes with her beautiful backgrounds.
this is an interesting session because it's on change, and
It keeps
the participants keep changing. So
perfect.
We did that intentionally to do a performative like version of the topic. So let's just, if you want to play along with me, maybe we could just wrap this up with a like a 1 or 2 sentence statement of what change do you anticipate for you, yourself, in the near future, however you want to say, if that's 6 months or 2 years, or if you had to guess. We know this is a guess, but I think that when you look out in the short term, what do you anticipate or hoping might be there for you? It's like hoping for a Christmas present. We never get what we want, but secretly we do have wishes.
I mean, I can start and say that what struck me personally was the exchange, Bonnie, when you were saying something about saying to HA, oh, look, you used the energy of the shift and moved towards something that was more aligned versus retreating. And not to demonize the retreating, because sometimes we have to retreat too.
Mm-hmm.
I feel personally like I've been for a long time retreating. And literally I've been saying 2020 was a retreat here at the farm. And the change that I would like to I liked that idea of using the energy of change and the shift to move out and into, closer to alignment with this vision I see for myself and the world and for my family, and a way of being in service and of service that is more public. So that's what I'm really appreciating that frame.
What I would wish for as far as change is, I guess when we talk about change and a relationship to the future, I feel like there's such a potential in myself and us humans to not lose touch with who we uniquely are, and yet to drop a lot of the guards that we have to defend ourselves from feeling separate from others. That then, I guess my wish is that we can like, God, how am I going to say this? I feel like it matters so much that we finally figure out how to actually work together. Like I see around the world, close to me in my life, I just see so many possibilities that constantly get sabotaged because we just don't seem to be able to work together. And I don't think the solution's complicated. It might be hard or unfamiliar, but I don't think it's complicated. I actually think it's a big part of the human arc, which is to stay totally true to who each of us really is, but then to drop all that extra stuff. And I feel like then we could actually make change happen at a whole different scope, while staying really close to the ever unfolding nature of what change is anyways. But yeah, I really wish we could crack that nut. I just feel it would change a lot in a good way.
Jay, are you there?
I am here. I'm just scared to show my video because my internet connection keeps on cutting.
Yeah, you might have to shut it off.
Change just keeps happening. Hey, Chip, how about you turn your video off and then you speak, because that might give you enough bandwidth. Because right now you're frozen.
I can go. Mine is very similar to yours, Miriam, in the sense that trying to, coming out of COVID, trying to, my hunch is that there is going to be a lot more energy for collaboration, and trying to notice where that potential's really peaking, and that it's easy, like these 5 people, boom, let's just do that. I feel that there's little clusters of, yeah, so I'm trying to identify some of those and try to see if I can't help initiate some more collaboration. Yeah, so those are, like I said, like where it's easy, where these people are already maybe leaning into some kind of co-creative dynamic, and trying to notice that. And I think these are ways in which, if you can observe, then you can get a lot of result for, not a lot of complicatedness. That's what you said. It's not, it's It's identifying it and not getting distracted by things that really aren't going to be. It's like making a really good 3-course meal. Like when the 3 really complement each other, then it's easy. And sometimes you put too much effort into each of the 3, and everyone's like a first course dinner, and the dinner sucks. So something like that.